If you love great stories, you've come to the right place. Subscribe to my channel to make sure you don't miss any new videos. Like and share this video with your friends if you enjoyed it, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The march from the north had been a journey through a dying world. As Jon Snow, Daenerys Targaryen, and the remnants of their shattered army crossed the Trident, the snow did not stop. It simply changed color. The white flakes of the north were replaced by a gray, greasy ash that fell from a sky the color of a bruised plum. When they finally crested the Blackwater Rush and saw King's Landing, the breath left Jon's lungs. The city did not look like the capital of a kingdom. It looked like a massive, crystalline growth on the edge of the sea. Cersei had spent the weeks following the fall of the wall, reinforcing the city with every ounce of gold and wildfire at her disposal. The walls of King's Landing had been coated in a gilded slag, a mixture of melted Lannister coin and alchemical resin. Under the dim, overcast sky, the city shimmered with a sickly, iridescent green glow. "She hasn't just built a fortress," Tyrion whispered, his voice trembling as he looked through a spyglass. "She built a giant conductive circuit. The gold on the walls isn't for show, Jon. It's meant to hold the heat. She's turned the city into a kiln." The army of the living was a shadow of its former self. There were fewer than 5,000 Northmen and wildlings left. They stood in the mud of the King's Road, their armor rusted and their spirits hollowed by the scourge of winter. Daenerys stood at the center of the camp, her eyes fixed on the Red Keep. Above her, Rhaegal and the scarred Drogon circled low. The dragons were no longer the magnificent beasts of Slaver's Bay. Their wings were tattered, their scales dull, and they breathed with a wet, raspy wheeze. They were dying of the gilded fever, and they knew it. "We don't have the numbers for a siege, Dany," Jon said, stepping beside her. "And if we attack those walls, we're walking into a furnace." "We aren't here for a siege, Jon," Daenerys replied. Her voice was cold, stripped of all the warmth that had once defined her. "We are here for an execution. If the world is to end in fire, let it be the fire of a dragon, not the fire of a lion." As the sun, if it could be called that, reached its peak, the silence of the city was broken. Along the walls of King's Landing, hundreds of scorpions began to rotate. But these were not the wooden machines of the Blackwater. These were made of solid, polished brass, their mechanisms oiled with the lion's blood, concentrated wildfire. Cersei appeared on the battlements of the Gate of the Gods. She was wearing her gilded armor, a suit of interlocking gold plates that made her look like a humanoid dragon. Behind her, the 3 Lannister dragons, Tywin, Joffrey, and Miachella, crouched on the towers like gargoyles of gold and glass. "Traitors, bastards, thieves!" Cersei's voice was amplified by a series of brass horns built into the walls. "You come to my city with your broken wolves and your dying dragons. You come to ask for mercy from the queen you tried to burn." She raised her hand, and the golden dragons let out a synchronized roar that shook the earth. "There is no mercy left in King's Landing," Cersei screamed. "There is only the debt, and today the Iron Bank of the Soul comes to collect." The battle did not begin with a charge of cavalry. It began with the sky catching fire. The golden scorpions fired. They didn't shoot bolts. They shot wildfire coils, long, spiraling glass tubes filled with the emerald liquid. As the tubes flew through the air, they shattered, creating a literal rain of wildfire over the Targaryen camp. "Shields to the trenches," Jon roared. The emerald fire hit the mud, and the reaction was instantaneous. The wildfire didn't just burn. It reacted with the salt in the air and the snow on the ground, creating a wall of green steam that blinded the northern archers. In the chaos, Cersei unleashed her dragons. Tywin and Joffrey dived from the walls. They were no longer just animals. They were armored tanks of the sky. Their gold-plated wings acted as shields against any arrows, and their breath was a focused, laser-like stream of green fire that cut through the northern lines like a hot knife through wax. Daenerys took to the sky on Drogon, with Jon mounting Rhaegal. This was the dance of the wildfire skis. The 2 Targaryen dragons met the 3 Lannister dragons over the Blackwater. It was a chaotic, dizzying nightmare of color. The orange-red fire of the Targaryens clashed with the neon emerald fire of the Lannisters. Drogon, despite his limp, was still the largest predator in the sky. He slammed into Joffrey, his black claws tearing through the golden plating. But the Lannister dragon's scales were rigged with response vials. Every time Drogon's claws broke a scale, a burst of wildfire sprayed into his face. Drogon shrieked in agony, his vision clouded by the green toxins. "He's leading us toward the city," Jon yelled, as Regal parried a strike from Miachella. Tywin, the massive golden dragon carrying Cersei, was hovering directly over the great sept of Baelor, or what was left of it. Cersei was watching them, her face a mask of religious ecstasy. She wanted them over the city. She wanted them within the gilded circuit. As Drogon and Regal chased the Lannister dragons deep into the airspace over the city, Tyrion, watching from the ground, realized the horror. "Dany, Jon, pull back," he screamed, though they couldn't hear him. He had seen the gilded slag on the walls begin to glow. The city wasn't just a fortress, it was a giant capacitor. Every time the dragons breathed fire, the energy was being absorbed by the gold-coated buildings and channeled into the massive wildfire caches beneath the streets. The Targaryens were literally fueling their own destruction. Every Dracarys was a hammer blow against the fuse of the world. "She's charging the city," Tyrion whispered, falling to his knees in the mud. "She's using the dragons to ignite the motherlode." Just as Jon and Daenerys closed in on Tywin, Cersei pulled a final lever on her dragon's harness. A pulse of pure, emerald energy erupted from the spires of the Red Keep. It wasn't an explosion. It was a wave of localized, alchemical gravity. The air over King's Landing turned a brilliant, blinding green. Drogon and Regal, their wings suddenly feeling like they were made of lead, were slammed out of the sky by the sheer force of the pressure. They crashed into the rooftops of the Flea Bottom district, the ancient wood and stone shattering beneath their weight. The clouds have parted, revealing a massive, emerald-colored vortex swirling over the city. King's Landing is no longer a city of men. It is a glowing, golden furnace, and the two Targaryen dragons are trapped in the center of the kiln. "The debt is paid," Cersei's voice echoed through the green mist, sounding like the final bell of a funeral. The crash of the dragons had leveled 3 city blocks, sending a plume of black soot and golden dust 1,000 feet into the emerald-tinted air. When Jon Snow opened his eyes, he was draped across the broken remains of a bell tower in Flea Bottom. The air tasted of copper and scorched sugar, the signature scent of aerosolized wildfire. Below him, Regal Asterisk lay in the street, his green scales cracked and his chest heaving. The dragon's right wing was twisted at an unnatural angle, pinned beneath a fallen beam of gilded oak, wood that had been petrified with alchemical resin. "Dany," Jon croaked, sliding down the rubble. He found her a dozen yards away, emerging from the smoking ruins of a bakery. Her silver hair was singed, and her face was streaked with a mixture of ash and the pale, shimmering dust of the gilded fever. She was staring at Drogon, who was pinned in the middle of a narrow alleyway, his massive tail lashing out and shattering the surrounding houses. "They can't get up, Jon," Daenerys said, her voice sounding dangerously hollow. "The air, it's too thick. The gold in the walls is vibrating." She was right. A low, subsonic hum filled the city, a frequency that made the teeth ache and the eyes twitch. Every golden surface in King's Landing, the statues, the window frames, the gilded armor of the guards, was glowing with a faint, rhythmic pulse of emerald light. The silence of the crash was broken by the sound of rhythmic marching. From the shadows of the high-walled streets emerged the Gilded Guard. These were not the soldiers of the North. They were men who had been fused into their armor by the Gilded Protocol. Their breastplates were embossed with the Lannister lion, and their helmets featured visors of thick, green glass. They carried fire lances, long, brass-tipped spears that could ignite a stream of liquid wildfire at the pull of a trigger. "The Queen commands your silence," the lead guard shouted, his voice metallic and cold. "I am the Queen," Daenerys screamed, her rage finally breaking through her shock. She grabbed a shard of broken glass from the ground, her hand bleeding as she clutched it like a dagger. "To me," Jon roared, drawing Longclaw. The northern survivors, Tormund, Arya, and a handful of weary Stark men emerged from the rubble of the nearby buildings. They were outnumbered 10-1, trapped in a labyrinth of gold and stone. The combat in Flea Bottom was a visceral, bloody nightmare. The fire lances turned the narrow alleys into corridors of flame. Every time a Northman tried to charge, a jet of green fire would incinerate the front line, turning the mud of the streets into a bubbling, toxic soup. "Jon, we can't win this here," Arya shouted, parrying a fire lance with the needle. She moved like a blur of gray against the gold, her training in bravos allowing her to see the gaps in the Gilded Guard's heavy plates. "The hum! It's coming from below. The whole city is afuse." Jon looked at the ground. He could feel the vibration through the soles of his boots. It wasn't just a hum, it was a countdown. Tyrion knew, Jon realized. The motherlode. It's not just in the tunnels, it's in the foundation of the city itself. Cersei isn't trying to keep us out, she's keeping us in. She's going to melt the entire city into a single block of gold and ash. "If we can reach the Alchemists' Guild," Arya said, pointing toward the Hill of Rhaenys. "The vents. If we can open the pressure valves, we might be able to vent the heat before the whole city goes." "Go, Arya," Jon commanded. "Take the men you can. I'm going for the Red Keep." "You won't make it to the gates, Jon." "I won't be using the gates," Jon said, looking up at the scarred, shivering Regal. Jon climbed back onto Regal's neck. The dragon let out a low, pained groan, his golden eyes reflecting the emerald sky. "I know you're hurt, lad," Jon whispered, pressing his forehead against the dragon's cold, damp scales. "But we have to move. One last time, not for a crown, for the people she's burning." Regal, fueled by the primal bond of his blood, forced himself to stand. He couldn't fly, his wing was a ruin of shredded membrane, but he could walk. The green dragon became a terrestrial juggernaut, his massive claws tearing up the cobblestones as he pushed through the ranks of the Gilded Guard. Daenerys mounted Drogon, and the two crippled dragons began a slow, agonizing march toward the Red Keep. It was a macabre parade. The queens of the sky were now the butchers of the earth, crushing the gilded barricades underfoot as they moved toward the center of the web. High above, on the balcony of the Red Keep, Cersei watched the progress. She was sipping a glass of gold-leafed wine, her eyes bright with a terrifying clarity. Beside her, Qyburn was monitoring a series of glass spheres that glowed with varying intensities of green. "The heat is at 70%, Your Grace," Qyburn noted, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and pride. "The Gilded Circuit is holding. The dragons are providing the final charge. Their very movement, the friction of their bodies against the city, is feeding the motherlode." "They are so predictable," Cersei said, her voice a soft purr. "They think they are heroes. They think they are the fire. They don't realize they are just the tinder." She looked down at the streets, where the tiny, gray dots of the Northern Army were being swallowed by the green flames. "Tell the Golden Company to withdraw to the inner sanctum," Cersei ordered. "Let the dragon and the wolf reach the throne room. I want them to be standing right in front of me when the world finally turns to glass." While the dragons marched, Arya and a small team reached the entrance to the Alchemists' Guild. But the basement was no longer a workshop. It was a cathedral of green light. Thousands of jars of wildfire were suspended from the ceiling in a network of gold-spun wires. The heat was so intense that Arya's leather armor began to smoke. "The valves are over there," she shouted, pointing to a series of massive iron levers. But as they reached for the levers, a figure stepped out from behind a pillar of jars. It was a gilded automaton, one of Qyburn's final horrors. It was a suit of plate armor filled not with a man, but with a pressurized core of wildfire. It didn't breathe, it hissed. "No one touches the Queen's debt," the automaton rumbled, the voice sounding like grinding gears. As Arya engaged the machine, she realized the truth. The valves weren't meant to vent the heat. They were meant to release the wildfire into the sewers. There was no way to stop the explosion from the inside. Jon and Regal reached the foot of the Aegon's Hill. The Red Keep loomed over them, its golden walls glowing like a sunset. Regal let out a final, earth-shaking roar and collapsed. The dragon's heart, overcharged by the chemical heat of the city, finally gave out. He didn't die quietly. His body began to glow with a brilliant, white-hot intensity before he turned into a statue of obsidian and ash. Jon stood in the shadow of his fallen brother. He was covered in black soot and green blood. He looked up at the Red Keep, where Cersei stood watching him. He didn't have an army. He didn't have a dragon. He had only a sword and a debt of his own. The emerald vortex in the sky has descended, touching the spires of the city. The hum has reached a deafening crescendo. The wildfire skis were about to break, and as Jon began to climb the steps of the Red Keep, the ground beneath his feet began to turn into liquid gold. The climb up the Serpentine was a journey through a furnace. Jon Snow's boots left scorched imprints on the stone, and every breath felt like swallowing a handful of hot needles. Behind him, the city of King's Landing was no longer a city. It was a screaming, glowing bowl of emerald fire. He reached the great hall of the Red Keep. The massive oak doors had been melted into puddles of bubbling amber. Jon stepped through the threshold, Longclaw held low. The throne room was unrecognizable. Cersei had stripped away the tapestries and the icons of the Seven. The walls had been plated in polished Lannister gold, reflecting the green glow from the wildfire skis outside, creating an infinite, dizzying hall of mirrors. At the far end, beneath the stained-glass window of the seven-pointed star, now replaced by a massive, emerald-eyed lion, sat the Iron Throne. And there sat Cersei. She didn't look like a woman at the end of her tether. She looked like a goddess of the apocalypse. Her gilded armor hummed with the same subsonic frequency as the city. Beside her stood the mountain Sir Gregor Clegane, his armor no longer black, but a dull, scorched bronze. His eyes, visible behind his visor, were not red or blue. They were the blank, glowing green of a wildfire flask. "You're late, bastard of Winterfell," Cersei said, her voice cutting through the hum of the city with a terrifying, melodic clarity. "The dragons have already provided the spark. The gold is already molten. You've come to watch the final payment." "It's over, Cersei," Jon said, his voice a raspy ghost. "The Night King is dead. The North is a graveyard. There's nothing left to rule. Stop the wildfire. Give the people a chance to breathe." Cersei let out a soft, tinkling laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Breathe? Why would they want to breathe the air of a world that produced you? A world of honor and duty that resulted in nothing but ash? No, Jon Snow, I am giving them something better. I am giving them a memory that will never tarnish." A shadow fell over the throne room as the roof, already weakened by the heat, shattered. Drogon, the last of the Targaryen dragons, landed on the high gallery, his massive claws tearing into the gilded stone. Daenerys Targaryen climbed down from his back. She was a vision of ruin. Her dress was a tattered rag of black silk, her skin was blistered, and her eyes were the violet of a brewing storm. She stood beside Jon, her presence completing the triumvirate of the war. "Cersei Lannister," Daenerys said, her voice vibrating with a power that seemed to come from the earth itself. "I have crossed the world to take back what was stolen from my father. I have lost my children, my friends, and my soul to your greed." "And yet here you are," Cersei replied, standing up from the throne. "Standing in my house, breathing my air, waiting for me to tell you that you've won. But look around you, little girl. What have you won?" Cersei gestured to the windows. The city of King's Landing was literally liquefying. The buildings were collapsing into the gilded circuit, the gold conducting the heat until the stone turned to lava. "Qyburn's greatest discovery wasn't the wildfire," Cersei said, walking down the steps of the throne. "It was the connection between gold and the spirit. You think the gilded fever was a sickness. It was an invitation. Every person in this city who has ever touched a Lannister coin is now a part of the motherlode. Their lives, their memories, their very essence. It's all being converted into the fire." Jon felt a cold shiver that defied the heat of the room. "You're killing everyone, not just your enemies, your own people." "My people," Cersei sneered. They are the clay, I am the sculptor. When this is over, there will be no more King's Landing. There will be a single, massive mountain of solid gold and emerald glass. It will be the only thing left on this continent that doesn't rot. It will be my monument, my gilded piece. I will kill you first, Daenerys whispered. You can try, Cersei said, and with a flick of her wrist, the mountain stepped forward. The fight in the throne room was a clash of three distinct magics. The mountain moved with a speed that defied his bulk, his bronze blade trailing a wake of green fire. Jon intercepted him, Longclaw meeting the bronze sword with a spray of sparks that lit the room in a strobe of orange and green. Meanwhile, Daenerys moved toward Cersei. She didn't use a sword, she used her hands. As she approached, the heat in the room seemed to flow toward her, as if she were a vacuum for the flame. I am the unburnt, Daenerys screamed. And I am the gold, Cersei countered. Cersei activated a mechanism in her gauntlet. A spray of concentrated, pressurized wildfire erupted. Daenerys didn't flinch. She walked through the green flame, her skin turning a brilliant, glowing red, her clothes vaporizing until she was a figure of pure, living heat. But Cersei's gold was treated with the cold alloy. As Daenerys reached for Cersei's throat, the gold of the queen's armor absorbed the heat of the Targaryen's skin. The two women locked together, one a pillar of fire, the other a statue of gold. The friction between them created a resonance that shattered the remaining windows of the Great Hall. Jon, struggling against the mountain, realized that the duel between the queens was the final catalyst. Their conflict, the literal meeting of the dragon's fire and the lion's gold, was the master key Qyburn had designed. The motherlode, beneath their feet, reached its critical mass. Arya, now, Jon roared, though he didn't know if his sister was even alive. Beneath the city, in the Alchemists' Guild, Arya Stark had finally found the primary valve. It wasn't a lever. It was a heart. The gilded automaton she was fighting was the regulator. She drove the needle through the green glass visor of the machine, and as the wildfire core of the automaton exploded, it triggered the manual release. The pressure in the city changed. The emerald vortex in the sky turned into a funnel, sucking the heat back down into the earth. In the throne room, the mountain suddenly stopped. His bronze armor began to crack as the wildfire energy was pulled out of him and back into the floor. He collapsed into a pile of empty metal and gray ash. Jon turned to the two queens. Daenerys and Cersei were still locked together at the foot of the Iron Throne. The heat had reached such an intensity that they were no longer two separate people. The gold of Cersei's armor had melted and fused with the scorched flesh of Daenerys' arms. They were a single, horrific sculpture of gilded fire. The debt, Cersei whispered, her eyes beginning to turn into green glass. Dracarys, Daenerys gasped, her breath a puff of orange flame. The floor beneath the Iron Throne gave way. The motherlode had reached its final state. A pillar of pure, emerald-white light erupted from the center of the Red Keep. It didn't expand outward, it imploded. Everything in the throne room, the gold, the mirrors, the Iron Throne, and the two queens, was sucked into the white-hot void of the alchemist's fire. Jon Snow was thrown back by the force of the implosion. He hit the far wall and watched as the center of the room simply disappeared. When the light faded, there was nothing left but a perfectly circular hole that went down into the very foundations of the earth. The Iron Throne was gone, the queens were gone, the gold was gone. Jon stood up in the smoking ruin of the Great Hall. The wildfire skis outside were fading, replaced by a dull gray rain that smelled of nothing. The hum had stopped. The city was silent. The central tower has collapsed, leaving a jagged silhouette against the sea. Below, the city of King's Landing is a blackened, smoking husk. There are no cheers. There is no music. Jon Snow walks to the edge of the hole where the throne once stood. He looks down into the darkness. There is no gold there, no silver, just the cold, dark earth of a world that has finally been emptied of its kings. He reaches down and picks up a single, half-melted gold coin from the rubble. He looks at it for a moment, then drops it into the void. Thanks for watching this episode. Like, share, and follow for more interesting stories and narrations. Thanks a lot.